Good morning, grade 12s. I hope I find you well. This morning we want to continue with manufacturing accounting, but focusing on analysis of cost. I have broken this side of the topic into 3 different parts. We'll be checking of analysis, we'll be talking of break-even, then we are going to talk of ethics and internal controls. So from today there are 3 different lessons. Starting on analysis, the next one will be break-even analysis, then internal controls and ethics. Now, this manufacturing cost topic is a paper 2 question. In paper 2, most of the questions are theory, so we need to understand the theory. We were focusing previously on the calculations, but now we need to go deeper into understanding the topic. So what is expected of us when we talk of analysis of cost? You are required to calculate unit cost. When we are talking of unit cost, we are referring to cost of producing 1 unit. But for all the different categories of cost, for direct materials, for direct labor, for factory overheads, for selling and distribution, and for administration. You are also expected to define and identify fixed cost and variable cost. Also to comment on cost behavior, why unit costs have increased from 1 year to the other, and suggesting reasons. Let us go to the first one on cost behavior. We have 2 main types of cost. We have fixed cost, we have variable cost. What is a fixed cost? Defined this concept last year: costs that are paid even at 0 production, or costs that remain constant as production changes. We have examples of rent, insurance, and depreciation. Variable costs, on the other hand, are costs that change as production levels changes, e.g. direct material cost and direct labor cost. Now, from what we have seen, manufacturing costs, it is equal to fixed cost plus variable cost. But in general, we have classified our cost into 5 different groups. Initially into 3. We have material costs, we have labor costs, we have fixed overheads. But we have identified that we have material, direct labor, we have fixed overheads, we have selling and distribution, we have administration. Now, in these 5 groups of ratios, we have generalized them to facilitate the calculation of cost. So fixed cost out of these are fixed overheads and administration. So when a question requires you to calculate break-even, as you are going to see, we need fixed cost. Even if you are not told, you must know that in general, fixed overheads and administration costs are fixed costs. Variable costs, on the other hand, are direct material costs, direct labor costs, and selling and distribution. We need to understand, this is very important, the classification of costs, fixed overheads, administration, they are fixed costs. Direct material, direct labor, and selling and distribution, they are variable costs. Now, the formula to calculate unit costs, we are saying total manufacturing costs divided by total number of units produced. So you can calculate fixed overhead cost per unit, administration cost per unit, direct material cost per unit, direct labor cost per unit, and selling and distribution cost per unit. Let us check on direct material cost per unit. It is calculated by direct material cost divided by total units produced. Now, on this, we need to analyze the changes in cost from one year to the other. Why direct material costs have increased, or why direct material costs have decreased from one year to the other. There are several factors that you need to know to prepare yourselves to show understanding when answering exam questions. So I have selected some few answers. You can add on them. Reasons for a decrease in direct material cost per unit. Let us assume that in 2018, the direct material cost per unit was 55 rands. Now, in 2019, it decreased to 42 to 42 rands per unit. So, what might be the reasons? One reason might be better quality material used. If the quality is good, it means there will be less breakages, therefore less wastage. So we are saving on material. Or maybe the manufacturer have changed to a cheaper supplier. It means they are now obtaining their raw materials at a lower cost. It has the effect of decreasing the direct material cost per unit. Or we have changed to a closer supplier, so we have reduced on transport cost. Maybe initially we were importing our raw materials. Now we have decided to buy raw materials locally. That cut of transport cost may decrease our direct material cost per unit. Or better training of workers. Our workers are more efficient. They are using materials effectively with less wastage as well. It saves in the business. Or tighter control or close supervision over the use of raw materials. When the supervisors are checking on workers, they are closely monitoring any wastage that will reduce cost. These are what I have given you. You can add on what I have. Then reasons for an increase. Now it is the opposite. Our direct material costs have increased from one year to the other. What might be the reasons? Poor quality material used. If material is poor, then it might result in increased wastage. Supplier increased prices. So if the supplier increases prices, cost of production and cost of raw materials will increase. Lack of supervision over the use of raw materials. Those are some of the reasons why raw material costs can increase. We are not going to talk of increase in production as a reason why direct material costs will increase, because this is a variable cost. As production increases, then the cost also increases. So it is covered in the definition. Direct labor cost per unit, direct labor costs divided by total units produced. Reasons for a decrease in direct labor costs. The use of latest or modern machinery or equipment which are more efficient. It might result in cutting costs. The use of trained or skilled workers which increase productivity. What the worker will contribute per hour will increase if they are skilled or they are trained. Close supervision of workers to reduce laziness. Theory X and Y says men are naturally lazy. They need to be monitored. So close supervision can help. we can set realistic targets that employees must achieve. I'm saying realistic because they must be motivated to reward employees who achieve targets as an incentive or motivation. Then provide favorable working conditions. Provision of generators to reduce the impact of power cuts. We are in the era of load shedding, so if there are generators on standby, it will lead to efficiency. What might increase now? Direct labor costs from one year to the other. If workers are employed for or they use more overtime, it might increase because more overtime is charged using higher rates than normal working hours. So if more overtime increase, direct labor cost increases. A decrease in productivity due to less workers or demotivated workers in one way or the other. Unproductive workers due to load shedding, power cuts. This is reality. Employed more workers due to increased production. That is an increase in cost. So questions might require you to suggest the reasons for the increase. When you are answering these questions, you also need to know the type of labor. You must also need to know the type of product they are producing. How is it affected by load shedding? How is it affected by training? How is it affected by the quality of material? So you are not just listing any of the answers that I have provided. You need now to take a step further on the situation on hand, because we remember when you are answering questions, you are not writing notes. Your answer must be relevant to the question on hand. Fixed overhead costs. Fixed overhead costs divided by total units produced. What might result in an increase of fixed overhead costs? We need to know the nature of fixed overhead costs. What constitutes fixed overhead cost? We are referring to indirect material, indirect labor, rent, factory, water and electricity, insurance, telephone, maintenance and repair, depreciation of factory equipment. So if we are talking of a decrease, it means the decrease is attributed to a combination of these expenses. Now, so the same reasons that we have mentioned for direct material will apply to indirect material. Now, if we have now a cheaper supply of our indirect material that we use, it will decrease fixed overhead cost per unit. All the reasons also for direct labor, if they are trained, if they are skilled, then they reduce the cost. Now, fixed cost is a fixed overhead cost is a fixed cost. In this time now, an increase in units produced will decrease fixed overhead cost per unit. Now, this is because of the nature of the fixed overhead costs. They are fixed in nature. Even as production increases, per unit will decrease. Better control expenses such as water and electricity, telephone and maintenance and repairs. If machinery is maintained regularly, it won't cost us, but if you skip maintenance days, then when you want to fix it when there is a breakdown, it becomes more costly. Telephone, it has to be monitored to reduce personal use by employees. So if there's better control of these expenses, fixed overhead costs will improve. What will increase now? The same reasons for direct material and direct labor, but since it is a fixed cost, a decrease in production might result in an increase in fixed overhead costs per unit. Or when we weaken control on other factory expenses, we are not monitoring the use of telephone, we are not also checking the due dates for maintenance of our machines. that will result in an increase in factory overhead cost per unit. Now, what must we consider when we are deciding whether to import raw material or to buy locally? This is a common question. What factors must a business consider? We can buy raw materials from outside South Africa. What must we consider before management reach to that decision? Okay, consider the quality of raw materials. Some countries might dump their poor quality to us, especially Africans. So whenever you decide, you have to check the quality. Consider the price, import duty, and the transport cost. To buy the raw material might be cheaper, but when you add import duty and transport costs, it might be the same thing as buying locally. So they need to consider everything. Consider the ability of the supplier to meet deadlines. So if some goods are really in demand and it takes time for raw materials to arrive your factory, then it might cause supply problems to your customers. Consider fluctuations in the exchange rate. This is more of economics, but we need to come to the part as well. Those who are doing economics can show that they understand this topic very well. Consider creating employment locally. Consider supporting proudly South African products. Those are some of the things that need to be considered when we decide to buy from outside South Africa. I want you to also continue researching on proudly South African products. What are the conditions? What are the incentives you need to take and understand that? Now, I expect you to go and do task 13.9 and 13.10. Today I'm not using exam papers, we are using our textbook. I want to see the answers in your workbook. The workbook is on page 114 to page 115. Use your workbook 2 for today's activity. It is good practice. We are going to do question papers on our last activity of this series. Good luck.